Hello, everybody, and welcome to our webinar. Um, it is officially noon, so I'll go ahead and kick us off. And I'll start with a little housekeeping. So if we have a few people struggling in, absolutely no worries at all. Now, I'd like to start by introducing myself. My name is Morgan Gagnon. I work as the Policy Research Lead at PERT, or the Provincial Employment Roundtable, if you prefer your acronyms spelled out. I am so excited to welcome you to today's webinar to share the findings of one of our latest research projects on the themes of supporting the economic and community integration of mature English speakers and mature English speaking workers in Quebec. We're going to be exploring themes of language, age, and ageism, and the intersection of those things within our research. So this is part of a project, a part of our growing portfolio, looking at the diverse communities, the different communities that make up the larger English-speaking community in Quebec. If you're interested in our other research, I welcome you to take a look at our website, which hopefully maybe a team member can drop in our chat right now. We'll start with a presentation of our research findings that I'll deliver. And then I'll welcome Laszlo Axe, Executive Director of La Passerelle, our project partner, my personal conspirator and collaborator, co-conspirator and collaborator to join us for a conversation to share his perspectives on the situation of mature workers in Quebec. And finally, at the end, we'll have time for a Q&A. So if you have any questions, comments, throughout the presentation or my conversation with Laszlo, I'll invite you to drop those in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. I'll also note that the webinar will be conducted in English, although you're welcome to pose your questions in English or French, comme tu veux. And finally, this webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be available on our YouTube channel if you'd like to share it out at a later time or return to this conversation. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen with you all here. Well, you can all you can all see this, and I will, let's see if I can minimize my box. Perfect. All right, so before we go any further, I'd like to acknowledge that the Provincial Employment Roundtable, while a provincial organization, is located in Montreal and currently situated on unceded Indigenous land. The Gagnon Nation is recognized as the custodians of these lands and waters. Giajoge, or Montreal, is historically known as a gathering place for many First Nations. Today, it is home to a diverse population of Indigenous peoples, including the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe nations. I'll move forward with our presentation. So a little bit about PERT. For those, the uninitiated among us. The Provincial Employment Roundtable, or PERT, is a nonprofit multi-stakeholder initiative. Our goal is to aid in addressing the issues of employment and employability facing the English-speaking community in Quebec. I thought I could get that sentence out in one breath, but alas. So we accomplish this through kind of two main pillars: research and engagement. We conduct research on the different issues and perhaps opportunities that we see within our community and within the province. And then we engage with the different stakeholders, both local community groups, government, private sector, education, to ground our research and to advance our findings. So we have what our executive director, Nick, likes to call a virtuous circle, where we see our two pillars of work informing one another. I'll note for this particular project, we also, as I said, had as a partner La Passerelle, and I will perhaps speak a little bit more about them when I introduce Laszlo. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about our project, what we're gathered here today to share with you all. So this project is funded by the Department of Canadian Heritage. We conducted it over the course of about a year. So more or less this time last year to to today. And the project aims to strengthen the role of employability organizations that support mature English speakers and promote their vitality. So we use a host of different research methods, looking at hard data, qualitative data, and even arts-based methods to examine the employment situation and needs of mature workers in Quebec, and as well as the organizations that are working to support them. And our goals are to increase awareness of the experiences and needs of mature English-speaking workers. Often ageism is kind of, or age and ageism are sometimes invisible factors that can impact individuals' experiences in a host of different arenas. Ours, of course, is focused on employment. So we wanted to advance a more nuanced portrait of the English-speaking community in Quebec and increase awareness of this nuance among our different stakeholders, and therefore give people the information to better meet those needs. And we also wanted to highlight and reinforce the work of employment service providers, the work that they do to support mature English-speaking workers. And finally, we hope that our work will promote the integration and retention of mature workers in the workplace. So a little bit about how we aim to meet our project goals. We wanted fundamentally to just understand the relationship between age and ageism in Quebec and language, because these are kind of the two focuses of the partner organizations in this project. La Passerelle works with mature workers. PERT examines employability for the English-speaking community. And so we wanted to put these things together. So to investigate this, to examine this subject, we utilized data from the Census of Canada. This is, I'll note, one of the only sources that is able to provide data on according to linguistic status or linguistic identity, according to different employment factors. So things like unemployment, things like income, so that we're able to actually see this the status of different language groups. We also conducted focus groups with 22 different participants. We did a program inventory, so we went out and sought different programs that were serving mature workers, counted and sorted them. And then finally, we did a photo voice project, which I was really excited to tackle, that asks individuals to utilize photography to express and capture experiences related to age and language. So I'll give you, I'll rattle off a few quick definitions to ground us in our conversation. So when we talk about English speakers and when we talk about language more broadly, we at PERT use Statistics Canada's definition of first official language spoken. So this is a concept that sorts people according to the first official language spoken. So it counts people as either people who speak English as that's the language they reach for, or they speak French, individuals who speak both, and individuals who speak neither. And what we do at PERT and what we do within the English-speaking community often is take half of all individuals who speak both English and French and put half of them into the English-speaking population and half into the French-speaking population. And this enables us to get a more robust idea of the numbers of people who might, say, seek different services in different languages, that kind of thing. So I will now start us off on our research findings. So I'll start with some hard data, the statistical data. So we looked at a couple different outcomes or kind of ways of measuring the employment and the employment situation of mature workers in Quebec. So what we see broadly when we look at labor force participation, which is of the population aged 15 and over, how many are either employed, have a job, or are unemployed but actively seeking work. So they're not retired, they're not fully removed from the group, but they're maybe changing jobs, something like that. And we see that with age, labor force participation declines, which is perhaps to be expected as people retire, things like that. We see that it's certainly highest among individuals aged 45 to 54, if we're looking at this category of individuals aged 45 and over. And then we see that it declines, and we see in this graph, we're looking at labor force participation according to both language and age. So we'll see that English speakers tend to have a moderately higher labor force participation rate as compared to French speakers, and that increases with age. So I'll go ahead and move on to my next statistic. So then when we look at the industries in which mature workers are, or mature English speakers in particular, are working, we see kind of shifts according to age. So for English speakers aged 45 to 50, the top industry is actually the same as that of English speakers aged 55 to 65. So there's heavy engagement in the manufacturing industry, followed by healthcare and professional and scientific and technical services. And then from age 65 onwards, the top industries in which English speakers work perhaps flips a little bit. So we see instead English speakers mainly working in healthcare and social assistance, followed by professional, scientific, and technical services, and then finally education services. And just for context, professional, scientific, and technical services is a bit of an umbrella term that can include things like lawyers, accountants, scientists, of course, people working in often professional and regulated industries. So what we do see concretely is maybe a decline in engagement in manufacturing in particular. And then if we go ahead and look at unemployment rate, we see that unemployment increases according to age group. And largely English speakers tend to have a higher unemployment rate than French speakers. And this is true among English speakers as a whole in Quebec. And this is true broadly for the category of individuals aged 45 and over. English speakers have a higher unemployment rate as compared to French speakers. But we'll see that unemployment spikes up with age, and it actually increases quite dramatically among French speakers in particular. You'll see among those age 75 and over, French speakers actually have an unemployment rate of about 33%. So perhaps what this tells us is that when we're looking at unemployment in particular, age is a strong indicator of unemployment. We can see kind of perhaps the impact or the correlation of age on this data. So then I'll pull up our data on income. So this graphic is examining the median employment income in Quebec according to age, again, according to language as well. So we see that employment income, similar to labor force participation, declines with age. And perhaps one of the reasons for that would be that as people age, they're less likely to derive their income from employment. They might derive it from other sources, such as perhaps their pension. But we do see that among English speakers, in particularly age over 65, have a higher median employment income than French speakers. And this echoes what we saw in a previous graph wherein English speakers had higher labor force participation. So taken together, this data might suggest that mature English speakers, as compared to mature French speakers, are more heavily engaged in the labor force. And of course, this can raise some questions as to why we see that, what the reason for that is. And of course, the data isn't necessarily going to provide us with a ready-made solution with a bow on top. You might consider, for example, that there's different barriers or desire to work among these linguistic groups. But this narrative is perhaps complicated by low income data that we see. So what we've seen thus far is higher kind of engagement with employment among English speakers. And what we're seeing in this data is that English speakers across the board, as compared to French speakers, are more likely to live below the low income cutoff rate. And so this is a trend that carries across all age groups, which we don't necessarily see in our previous data. So this might offer another explanation as to why English speakers are continuing to work and why they're continuing to have high engagement in the labor force. Perhaps it's not driven entirely out of desire to do so. Perhaps it in part is driven by a need to do so. So following that, I'll switch gears. That's the end of our quantitative data. I'll talk a little bit about our programs that we compiled. So what I'll say is our quantitative data, our census data, paints a nuanced portrait of mature workers in Quebec. We see kind of varied employment and economic outcomes, which point to kind of different vulnerabilities among both English and French speakers. We see high unemployment rates, for example, and we also see among English speakers in particular, higher representation within the individuals who are living under the low income cutoff. So what we wanted to do next in our research was understand what types of programs are available to support mature workers in general and mature English speakers in particular, who are in need of assistance to find work or to reintegrate into the labor force, or a host of other kind of employment-related issues or needs. So we conducted a program inventory, which is to say we sought to gather together a list of all of the programs and services offered towards mature English language employment programs and services offered towards mature workers. So we utilized a keyword search using the terms below in combination with one another. And ultimately, what that returned was 5 programs. So through our search, which is fundamentally centered online, we find in the total province 5 English language programs that are designed or targeted specifically towards mature workers. All of those were located on the island of Montreal, with one providing some additional services to individuals living in Montérégie. I'll note as well that we spoke to some program providers to get a little a deeper understanding perhaps of their perspectives. And they highlighted that sometimes there was an issue of not so much need for more programs to meet the needs of these individuals, but programs that were better equipped to meet the diverse needs of the clients that they were seeing. So we'll hear a little bit more about that in my presentation in a moment, and then from Laszlo, I'll pull at that thread a little bit more. But for now, I'll switch gears to yet another dimension of our research, which would be our focus groups. So we saw the quantitative data. We saw the hard stats on the different employment situation of different linguistic groups according to age, and we saw the programs that were available to them. But we also know that that data isn't always able to tell us the full story. We're not able to hear the experiences of different individuals who are navigating the labor market and or trying to access different employment supports. So in order to get some more context, some more insight into the hard data, we conducted focus groups with 22 mature individuals. And what I'll present now are just some of the key themes that came out of those conversations, which took place last October. So first of all, participants touched on the stickiness of identifying ageism. Some were able to point explicitly to experiences of ageism that they had. One individual mentioned a recruiter commenting on the number of years they had left, kind of their countdown to retirement. But others described kind of a difficulty of pinpointing experiences of ageism. And it was characterized kind of by this slow recession of opportunities and promotions and discussions about moving forward in the workplace. And for some individuals, this intersected with other elements of their identity. So when participants kind of experienced that gradual decrease of opportunity, or the consistent lack of outreach from recruiters or lack of opportunity from employers, they weren't sure if that was related to their age, if it was related to their gender, their immigration status, their language skills. And so because of that, they had a hard time understanding what the issue was, or if it was related to, say, their skill set, if they just genuinely weren't say the right fit for a specific job. And so there wasn't a clear action that they could take as a result of that. Additionally, some people talked about the intersection of gender with ageism, such as particularly this focus on looks. For example, pressure among women to dye their hair. I think we're all relatively well acquainted with Lisa Laflamme, and I think that's a pretty stark example of ageism and kind of sexism in a particular industry. Some participants as well described linguistic barriers to employment and this desire to continue growing and to develop language skills that sometimes wasn't matched by a desire to invest in that kind of training from the employer. Additional themes included ageist assumptions, which varied considerably, ranging from the idea that employers might perceive mature workers as not being physically fit, as unwilling to work with younger managers. And participants articulated a desire to be assessed and valued by employers, not according to their membership in a particular demographic group, but according to their individual strengths and weaknesses, to what they were presenting to employers. And in this vein, participants also discussed kind of coping strategies that they use in their day-to-day to minimize their age and therefore the experiences of ageism that they would often experience in the hiring process, or to subvert ageist stereotypes. So some people shared kind of quick comments and comebacks that they've used in the hiring process to kind of call out ageism. Others talked about more kind of logistical elements, such as removing different dates of employment or education from their CVs to obscure age within the hiring process. Finally, participants talked about their attitudes towards aging. They were often characterizing just a continued desire to learn and to keep growing as individuals. Some people talked about firsts that they were experiencing from their 40s, 50s, 60s onwards, ranging from the professional first business ownership or getting a new degree to first marriage. And others kind of in this vein reported a continued desire to grow and to change and evolve, traits that are typically or often considered to be youthful, and noted that these seemed for them to not to track age, but just to track different dispositions. Some people are more creatures of habit, and others are more perhaps adventurous, perhaps habituated towards continued new experiences. And that's often up to the individual, not their age. And then following from this, participants described the benefits of being a mature worker or of having a mature worker in their workplace. And these, again, were very, very numerous, but some of the key benefits that came out were wisdom and emotional maturity and kind of the experience that comes from years of engagement within a particular industry or just a life experience. And they highlighted that as a form of diversity that and a perspective that they brought to the workplace that other individuals, younger individuals, what have you, perhaps just weren't able to bring. And so it's a strength in that way to have age diversity within a workplace. And last but not least, participants talked on the kind of relationship between mental health and employment and their sense of belonging within a workplace and within a community. They emphasize that work often is one of the main pillars around which we orient our lives. And when that pillar is taken out, it can have negative impacts, including depression, anxiety, and isolation. And when that snowballs with experiences of ageism, which often cause people to feel perhaps devalued or invisible, there's kind of a doubling down on those that can have an experience of doubling down on those negative mental health effects. And in addition to that, in addition to the need perhaps to work because it brings joy or a sense of purpose, a sense of community, a sense of value, participants also describe the straightforward need to continue to work because their pension was insufficient to cover the rising costs of living in Quebec. And so here we have a quote from a participant, which I would like to elevate just because I thought it was really well articulated. They stated, "I guess the biggest challenge that I have is not buying into this idea that you have less value. I'm not interested in giving my power away to a culture that might be youth obsessed." And so that kind of highlights the importance of shifting the discussion and the weight that we place on different characteristics to better value mature workers. So now I'll briefly just highlight, in addition to our research methods that I've just discussed, another, I should mention, our project collaborator and consultant at La Passerelle, Joanne Larouche, who partnered with me in particular to conduct all of the elements of this research, additionally delivered a survey of mature workers to individuals at La Passerelle, which gives us a profile of the different mature workers at La Passerelle, or the kind of the different clients at La Passerelle, as individuals, some of whom, as young as 40, going up to 75 years of age. And then the different profiles of people that you see using the services of La Passerelle. So women returning to the labor market after raising a family, people who had left the workforce to perhaps be caregivers to young children. And then after that, their parents. Perhaps I'll hear a little bit more about that from Leslie, the so-called sandwich generation. Newcomers to Canada, men and women, going into another profession after being laid off, individuals wanting to re-enter the workforce, or other individuals seeking employment who are also experiencing different mental or physical health challenges. So Joanne drafted and delivered a survey to the clients at La Passerelle, who reaffirmed that they, believed that ageism exists. Many highlighted that they believed it affected women more often than men, or perhaps that women experienced an additional dimension of ageism as it might intersect with sexism. The majority had experienced some form of ageism, and those who hadn't had seen others experience it, or had kind of had that experience of seeing the people within their network feel the effects of ageism. And they also remarked that different industries perhaps had different proximities or reflections on age. So some industries such as education, healthcare, business might value mature workers, while other sectors such as tech, marketing, or entertainment might have place a stronger value on youth. So the survey identified some preliminary supports for mature workers. So in the hiring process, showing age diversity, going beyond solely digital recruitment techniques, therefore holding in-person networking events, or actively recruiting mature workers in ways that are reflective of the how they prefer to be recruited. And in the workplace, offering ongoing training in technology and the French language as well, offering sensitivity training to younger managers and employers supervising mature workers, considering the strength of multi-generational teams and mentoring programs, so again, reflecting that age diversity. And finally, different work opportunities, such as job sharing, contract, or part-time work that might reflect the different preferred working styles of people at different stages of their life. And so following all this, we distilled all of this research, all of these themes, all of these reports and experiences into different recommendations to support the integration and retention of mature workers in the workplace. So these will be more fully fleshed out in an upcoming research report that we'll publish capturing these findings. And it'll go into more detail of some of the concrete steps that would better affect these changes. But we suggest the increased collaboration between employment service providers and government stakeholders, as well as employers working on issues related to the retention of mature workers, sensitizing employers, hiring managers, and recruiters to the needs and diversity of mature workers. Following that, structuring workplaces to meet the diverse needs and interests of mature workers, and therefore offering training opportunities to continue to upgrade the skills and to meet the desire to grow among mature workers. Increasing programming options to match mature or mature workers with organizations and employers that want or need to hire mature workers. And finally, increasing funding for organizations providing employment support to mature workers. So I'll end my presentation of our findings there. I recognize that I motored through them just a tad, so if anybody is interested in dwelling on these a little bit more, of course, you're more than welcome to reach out to me, or as I mentioned, we'll be publishing this research so that you're able to hold it in your hands and reflect on it at your own pace. But now I'll switch gears a little bit. Oh, sorry, and I'll stop sharing my screen there. And I will bring our special guest into this conversation. So it is my absolute joy, it's a true pleasure to introduce Laszlo Axe. Laszlo is the Executive Director of La Passerelle. He has several years of diverse management and human resources experience gained in multiple industries in the public, private, and non-for-profit sectors. His specialties include leadership, team building, and workforce development and optimization, motivation and engagement, recruitment and retention, project management, and mature worker career services. Laszlo, it is an absolute joy to have you and to have had you as a project collaborator and co-conspirator over the last year. Welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Thanks, Morgan.
Oh,
I'm going to have to try to match your energy level. I've been working at it. I think I could do it.
I have a coffee in front of me, so that's always a helpful factor. So the purpose of this conversation is to bring maybe your perspectives as an employment service provider for mature workers to the kind of portrait I've just delivered. So I'll start us off with a couple of questions, and then, as I mentioned, we'll have time for audience questions at the end, and I'll invite people to drop those in the Q&A box at their leisure. But first, Laszlo, could you tell us more, perhaps with the help of a story or two, how ageism affects mature workers, in particular, confidence and mental health, and where La Passerelle comes into that equation?
Sure. Morgan, just before we start, could I just say, like, we had a ton of fun working on this project, and it was a great example of intergenerational teamwork. I mean, it was like And yeah, I think both Joanne and I and everybody at La Passerelle totally enjoyed working with the PERT team. And at no point did we ever feel old.
Good.
I mean, as a result of this. So that just having said that, well, yeah, ageism. I mean, we deal with ageism all the time. It's so prevalent at La Passerelle, the issues of ageism. I just knocked off a couple of, some of the negative effects of ageism. Like again, the most obvious for us is it erodes the self-esteem, self-confidence aspect. A lot of our participants, by the time they come to us, there's very little self-esteem, self-confidence. We also internalize our feeling of inadequacy. So as we get older, we start to like wonder, like, am I good enough? Am I still relevant? And having ageism in the workforce or in the recruitment process, whether it's real or perceived, just has that added effect on our ability to, let's say, reorient ourselves, find meaningful employment. The stress, the added constant stress of job insecurity. Am I going to get laid off? Am I too old? Am I going to let that go? Will I be let go? Will I be able to find work, etc.? So that's constant stress, and the stress obviously has a negative effect on our health, whether we're talking about chronic issues or health, cardiovascular issues, depression, anxiety, the whole works. It's just a big mess, right? It also contributes to social isolation, whether it's at home when you're trying to get back to the workforce, or even within the workforce. Like you don't feel like you belong anymore. And again, some of this perception, self-perception, others it's real perception. So like at La Passerelle, what we've noticed is, like, and I mentioned earlier, by the time they come to us, there's hardly any self-confidence left. And some are better at hiding it, some aren't. But the thing is, you cannot be effective at job search. You can't go into a new adventure without self-confidence. Whether it's like going for a job that's a little bit beyond your reach, or just going through the whole process of recruitment, so you need that self-confidence. What we've noticed at La Passerelle, particularly since the pandemic, is there's an increase in the time it takes for us to get to actually job search. There's extra weeks now. The word psychological trauma, workplace trauma is coming up more and more. The effects, it's getting harder to get back in. So all of these things are having a huge impact on mature workers and their ability to get back into the workforce. When I started at La Passerelle, way back, longer than I want to remember, because it's only supposed to be 4 years, but don't tell anyone. The average time people would spend at La Passerelle would be, let's say, about 11 weeks. It's a 24-week program. Now what we've noticed in the last couple of years is creeping up 17, 18 weeks. And several of our participants actually stay 24 and a bit longer, just because it takes a little bit longer to get back into the swing, or actually be able to look for work. What does La Passerelle do? I mean, one of the first things we do is we tackle the self-confidence issue just by going through, because we tend to forget, right? We'll only remember the negative stuff, or the fact that this is happening, but we don't talk about the positive things that we've done. So we go through our professional history and everything, just to see how we're doing, what we've done, what we've accomplished, and that kind of like, oh yeah, I did that, I did this. And the other thing is, with this whole recruitment process, is that like I said, whether it's perceived or actual age discrimination, there's no feedback. So we walk into an interview and we don't get the job, or we submit a bunch of resumes, we don't get any feedback. So like there's a little voice inside the head saying, well, maybe I'm old, maybe I'm irrelevant, I don't know. And every time something negative happens, it just reinforces it. That's my 5th CV, my 10th CV I've sent, or I've had 3 interviews, I never get it. So it's just, and there's no feedback. So this voice gets louder to the point where you're there, well, I guess qu'est-ce ça donne? We get to the point of qu'est-ce ça donne? Why should I do another CV? Why should I apply? I'm not going to get any feedback too. So all of these negative things that, I talk about that Passerelle, but all of us do it. All the employment service providers do the same. We try to get people to realize that, yes, you do have value and you have a place in the workplace, and just to get them to that point is half the challenge.
And very worthy,
Yeah,
Jack.
so you're gonna have to stop me. Like I forgot to put my timer on, and you
You're
know me.
I'm
Well,
your timekeeper,
do my
not a problem.
do
You're doing
the
great.
do the red light thing.
Um, so next question. Thank you for your response to our first question. Um, Among others, the Harvard Business Review has an article on ageism affecting women in particular. They talk about how there's no right age to be a woman. You're in the workplace, you're too young to be taken seriously. Then there's presumptions that you're going to leave to start a family. Then you're going to need to serve as perhaps a caregiver. So could you talk perhaps a little bit from your perspective about how ageism, perhaps more broadly aging, interact with gender or other elements of people's identity?
Oh yeah, we could talk about gender. I mean, I'm going to just add to what you were
In
saying,
in the 3 minutes.
and we'll fix it too. Um, yeah, no, just to add on to what you were saying earlier, the Lisa LaFlamme incident and the perception of, um, looks and everything. And you mentioned it earlier too, this not the stereotype, but the sandwich generation. We see that a lot at La Passerelle. The women especially tend to be responsible for the kids, and then older families, older kids, but also for the parents. So they have to juggle work, or if they're not working, juggle the whole recruitment process while taking care of their parents and the kids. That's a lot of extra burden. I'm not saying the men don't do that; they're involved as well, but it tends to be more the women. And as we get older, we see a lot more of that. Um, some of the other things that we've seen is, depending on culture, sometimes the youngest daughter or the daughter is just assumed that she will take care of the parents. And a lot of the time the parents are, no, in the old country, they have to go back. So, that has a huge impact on everything, on if they're working, or the job search process. And sometimes we've also seen where, again, this happens more with the women, but um, if one of the siblings happens to be unemployed, the remaining siblings kind of say, well, you take care of ma or pa, we're working. So then it becomes even harder to find a job because they're just, taking on the responsibility. But, I also want to, I mean, women are always in the focus, and yet they do have it tougher. But some of the men that I've seen at La Passerelle, especially the older ones, where they were brought up to feel like it's their responsibility to take care of the family. And by not working or not being able to find a job, there's tremendous shame associated with not being able to provide for the children, for the wife, and cultural and age wise as well. But that's a huge stumbling block. And men aren't always great, not stereotyping here, but men aren't always great at sharing their feelings and dealing with these things. But it's a huge thing as well, especially for older men.
Thank you. And my final question before we move into the Q&A. This is a fun one, I think. Could you tell me a little bit from your perspective about what mature workers have to offer businesses and employers? Talk to me about the value of age diversity.
Values, yes. Okay, so again, there's tons, like, again, not stereotyping. We all have the things, that the values and what we're bringing to the workplace, but experience. We have one of the workshops on mature workers and some of the advantages, and one of the things we like to say is, like, okay, so from experience wise, yes, we've accumulated a lot of experience, but we've been there when things have fallen apart. When the projects are coming in late, or it's over budget, we've survived. So a lot of times it's your first time when there's like an issue. We've been there, so we have a little bit of wisdom that we can bring to the equation to kind of like help get over the big hump. When we talk about expertise, I remember when I was at La Passerelle, one of the things that really shocked me and frustrated me was, like, when people would say, well, anything over 10 years is not really relevant anymore. Don't even put in your CV. And I found that frustrating because, we are what we are because of the accumulation of experiences. So yes, technology wise, I'm not going to say I was an expert at COBOL, but I'm not going to put that on my CV. But having worked on projects is still relevant. The people aspect is, there's so much. And then, all these experiences shape who we are. So to discount experiences past 10 years. So one of the things we do in our resumes, we just say prior experience past, let's say now it's 2000. No, it's not. It's 2010. Oof. But anyway, just highlight one or two companies that you worked for and just your title. Don't write anything big, just do one-liners, just so that you can go back and say, yeah, I have all these experiences that are good. Reliability, again, not to stereotype, but the older generations tend to be a little bit more reliable. You're not going to find out on social media that the person's not working in your department anymore. Kind of like, again, not stereotyping, but we tend to be there. We tend to be there in the morning after. So there's a little bit more reliability when it comes to mature workers. Mentorship and leadership is definitely one of them. I mean, there's definitely things that we could bring to the equation, but I think the key there is that it's two-way mentorship. It's not just us telling people, oh, this is how you should do it. It's also listening, integrating what's going on now, and then shaping and altering, the advice that we give. There's one company, I'm gonna give a shout out. I went to a while ago, I went on a trip to M1 Composites, and they gave us a tour, and then they were showing the shop floor. And then they had two, one was clearly an older gentleman, same color hair as I have, and the other one was like clearly younger, 20s, 30s. And then the president went, we don't know which way this discussion is going. Who's mentoring who, we don't know. It's just there's that much mutual respect on the floor that it's just like everybody brings their experience into one. So I thought that was really cool. Interpersonal skills. Sometimes it's, we're stereotyped to have more interpersonal skills. Problem solving, providing solutions. We tend to be a little bit better at it. Just because, again, having worked with you, that kind of falls apart a bit. But I'm just saying, again, the big picture, that's kind of some of the stuff we bring to the equation.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, just in terms of experience, you've had more problems to encounter along the route of your career, and therefore would develop a little bit more wisdom in how you approach them when they inevitably arise.
It does. I earned each one of these gray hairs.
Yeah, our next research project will be inventorying the cause of each gray hair on your head.
I got a few. Kids being one of them.
So next, I'll go ahead and pivot to our Q&A. So I'll again invite anybody who'd like to pose a question to jot it into the Q&A. I see if I just open this up. Oh, there we go in front of me. Just a small technical question first about where you can find this presentation or this information after the fact. So we'll be uploading this presentation to our YouTube channel. We'll also be putting all of our research into a report that will be deliciously detailed, and so you'll be able to dive into a little bit more of the findings there. I see some hands raised. I'm going to ask you to put questions just in the question box so I can concentrate all of my attention giving to one location. So I'll start maybe with I see a question about how maybe more examples of policies or practices that help to foster and attract multi-year intergenerational teams. Leslie, would you like to touch on that a little bit?
Sure. I mean, policies, we could look at policies that reinforce combating ageism in the workplace, like sensitizing people to the effects of it, because a lot of times it doesn't happen. It's probably not even intended, but just in the recruitment process, we've come back where people are come back to us and said, like, they flat out told me I'm too old. It's like, aside from being illegal, it totally knocks people off. But even in the workplace, I mean, we all have our strengths. Each generation has our strength, and to discount mature workers just because you perceive them as being old in the stereotypes that they don't learn, they won't be able to adapt, they're not healthy, all the negative stereotypes have to be brought up and fought. And I find it ironic that in this time where, EDI is so prevalent and, the inclusiveness is a big thing, age is not even considered in this equation. So it's still fine. And I just rattled off some stats before. There's like, 50% of workforce are over 40 years old. I think, at 50, like 30% of the workforce is like 50 and above. So that's a lot of people. So I think it's definitely important to start putting in policies for age discrimination, to tackle age discrimination. Yeah, awareness is got to be one of the biggest ones.
Thank you. I see another question about the sample size of our study, and asking if it was a good size, if it was too small. So thank you for that question. What I'll say is we use different research methods to get, and I'll tackle this question first before asking if you have any additional comments, Leslie. But in our research, we use different methods to get multiple different perspectives on the topic. And so we use quantitative data to get a firm statistical grounding. The census, of course, provides us with a sample of about 25% of all Quebecers. So that data, when we're looking at employment statistics and economic statistics in particular, is very strong. When we go to qualitative data, it's quite standard to use a smaller sample size. And what we're looking for there is, firstly, opportunities to hear about different perspectives, about different intersections of problems or maybe explanations for some of the features that we're seeing in the hard data, or some of the things that aren't captured in the hard data. So those are the kinds of questions that we poke about in our focus groups. And what you're aiming for in a focus group is a saturation point. So there's a point at which you're kind of hearing the same things again. And of course, if you spoke to probably every mature worker across Quebec, you'd have a bit of a more robust sample size. But when you reach that saturation point, you have kind of a confidence that you're grounded in kind of the main issues or themes that you're perhaps encountering in relation to this project. So that's what we aim for in our qualitative research. And I'll just maybe flip the second half of this question to you, Leslie. So Mohan is asking, what is the obstacle, or perhaps obstacles plural, that prevent mature workers from getting interviewed? So you've named a couple of these already, but maybe I'll ask you to just put all those things together in one place.
Wow, that's a lot. Okay, so what
some of those things, some of the main themes.
Okay, so if we look at internalizing, a lot of times mature workers just won't have the courage to apply for the job, or like through frustration just won't apply for the jobs. Also, identifying what you want to do gets a bit harder. So, a lot of times you've been doing one thing, or something along the same lines, and then you're in a situation where you have to change totally, because whether technology changed or whether you just don't want to do it anymore. So coming to terms with what you can do and what you want to do is not always obvious. So that's a whole process in itself. Ageism, like I'll say, like, overt ageism is an issue where people make you feel like you're not going to have the job. Already interviews are stressful. I mean, they're not real. I mean, it's not a real situation. You're put in a room for half an hour, whatever, with well, it's still good when it's with a person. More and more it's technology. So you're going to be in front of a camera, and then they're going to like flip it on, you answer a bunch of questions. It's just, it just becomes tougher and tougher. So yeah, there are a lot of hurdles. That's why I would say, don't do this alone. There's La Passerelle, but there's a lot of us throughout Quebec that are sponsored and funded by Service Quebec that offer, help and guidance for mature workers to get them to the point where, they can function as job seekers effectively.
Yeah.
So don't do it alone. That's the hardest thing.
I'll also add that some of the other external barriers that we heard about from our participants, particularly in the recruitment process, have to do with kind of the screening process. So for example, needing education of a certain year or from like a specific institution, perhaps using specific keywords that are necessary for entry into a particular industry, or even right now the practice of using AI to scan resumes and see and cover letters to evaluate them, and the need therefore to reflect in those documents really specific keywords or phrases, relies on kind of a specific in knowledge that requires you to know about that process, and it's a process that just was fundamentally didn't exist if you were last applying to jobs even 5 years ago. So there's all these little tricky things, some of which are explicitly ageist, and some of which are just kind of by process of elimination, omitting that is, mature workers and kind of ruling them out as a byproduct of this practice. Oh, well, perhaps on that vein, Leslie, could you talk a little bit more about how technology impacts ageism at work, especially in terms of digital skills and accountability?
For those who, let's say, haven't, I mean, most of our participants have used, systems and computers, are more digitally literate. But, if you haven't had to use computers in the past, job searching without access to computers, or financially, if you don't have access to internet, it's a huge barrier. So just getting back into the workforce is a big barrier if you don't have access to technology. There is a stereotype that we don't adapt, which is ironic because we've adapted to so many things in the past. So again, he's not going to be able to, or she's not going to be able to figure this out. So, adapting to technology is something. Sometimes we're just like, oh, we have to learn something new. Do I have the energy to do it? So technology, but also technology is playing a positive role. You mentioned, well, I don't know, did you chat GPT? Yeah.
Yeah,
I thought
a little bit.
you did, yeah. It's, let's say along the linguistic barriers. So a lot of our English speaking participants, they speak French, they could communicate in French, but it's the written one that really makes them nervous. And, I've discovered ChatGPT, and it does a fairly good job at fixing up my French. And so does, there's so many deep L. So that's a huge technological advance. So it gives us an edge. Like I could even be part of a French chat. Like if it's a webinar, I could even, it's fast enough that I can write something and put it up. So in that sense, technology does play a big part.
Yeah, I think kind of lurking behind that, something that I've heard from our participants and also kind of in the literature on ageism more broadly, is this notion, as you mentioned, that mature workers aren't interested in learning or advancing their skill set, be it technological or otherwise. And that's therefore reflected in this policy that these types of training opportunities aren't offered. And at a certain point, for some people, for some mature worker, the conversation within the workplace of how would you like to grow here stops being asked to people. When, as we see in our groups and our focus groups and among our participants, that internal desire hasn't gone away. It's just stopped being teased out from the workplace. That's my 2 cents. So we do have a couple other questions. However, we are at 12:58, so I'm going to wrap up our conversation here. I invite you to reach out to me if anybody has further questions or would like to discuss in more detail any of the things that we've reviewed or we haven't had the chance to discuss in this conversation. I would like to give a big thank you to you, Leslie, both for your insightful comments in this webinar and for your partnership in this project and the work that you do at La Passerelle. You are irreplaceable, and it's been an utter delight to collaborate.
Morgan, this feeling is very mutual on behalf of all of the team at La Passerelle.
Totally. The last housekeeping, as I said, this webinar will be posted online if you're interested in viewing it on YouTube, and we will have a report bringing together a lot of the themes that we touched on and the data that you saw in my presentation. So I'll go ahead and close our webinar there. Thank you everybody so much for your attendance, and I'm wishing you all a lovely rest of your afternoon. Bye.
Cheers. Bye.